Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the afternoon session of our first symposium day. My name is Patricia Danda. I'm a curator at the Haus der Kunst and co-curator of the exhibition Image Counter Image. I feel very honored to introduce this panel discussion today, which is very closely tied to the topics and considerations that are crucial to the exhibition. The central questions addressed are those of the technical apparatuses and their impact on taking, or rather making, pictures, the reflection on image politics and visual agendas related to notions of the so-called truth, and how to critically engage these with regards to the global production and dissemination of images, in particular images of conflicts. Correspondingly, the theme of this discussion was defined as truth effects, who shows what and why, how the manipulation and control of images comes into effect, and the importance of understanding the underlying aims and mechanisms behind an image in order to develop a critical stance. It's a pleasure that three contributors to the exhibition and its catalogue will be discussing these issues together. Roy Samaha and Trevor Paglen are both presenting their photographic and filmic works in the exhibition, and Tom Hollert has contributed an essay titled Visual Antagonisms and a Critique of the Frame to our exhibition catalogue, which I would like to highly recommend for a reading. We're delighted that Maria Lavajova has agreed to moderate this panel. Since 2000, she has been the artistic director of Basis für aktuelle Kunst, BAK, in Utrecht, and has curated numerous exhibitions with artists such as Kutuluk Ataman, Sanja Ivekovic, Roman Ondak, Lawrence Wiener, or Artur Żmiewski. But I would say that Maria Lavajova is best known for her discursive and interdisciplinary exhibitions and projects, the most well-known of which is probably Former West. Initiated in 2008, this ongoing series of exhibitions, lectures, and seminars, which take place in various locations, address the impact of and the changes following from the events of 1989. The aim of Former West, if I may put it so briefly, is to rethink the way our world is and could be perceived now, after the breakdown of the dichotomy of East and West, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent political, social, economic, and cultural changes. Last year, Maria Lavajova curated the Roma Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which, such as the Former West project, was exemplary of her approach of connecting art and knowledge production. In 2005, BAK Utrecht hosted an exhibition which was titled Concerning War, curated by guest curator Brigitte van der Sande. As the synopsis says, this exhibition explored how artists attempt to represent the complex subject of war when it threatens to become a first-hand reality across the world due to current political conditions and the specter of terrorism. It was accompanied by a series of lectures, performances, and discussions titled Undercurrents, and by a critical reader with a series of elucidating essays that were aimed at understanding, I quote Maria Lavajova, what's behind the current state of a new warfare which involves everyone, regardless of social status, political and religious convictions, or geographic position. The series of lectures Undercurrents was conceived by Maria Lavajova for the BAK, and it laid the ground for an analysis of the articulations of the new wars. The topics, which were discussed by and together with numerous artists and theoricians, were termed On Crisis, Emergency and New Heroism, On Fear, War Machine and Threat, On Rhetoric, Language and New Warfare, On Mutation, Post-Cold War and the New Order, and last but not least, On Imagining, Options and Strategies of Resistance. This implied a very thorough analysis of the rhetorics and semantics of war, a discussion that we would like to concentrate on the role of the image in the context of conflicts. We're very happy that Maria Lavajova will moderate this discussion around the functions and functionalities of images. Please welcome Maria Lavajova, Tom Hollert, Trevor Paglen, and Roy Samaha.
Thank you so very much. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Does it work? Thank you very much, all of you, for coming to join us after lunch. Thank you for such a comprehensive introduction and reminding me of a Concerning War project, which we organized at about a couple of years ago. It will be my role this afternoon to make sure that we make use of this opportunity to engage in a conversation with some of the most critical, most brilliant minds in our field, and specifically when it comes to the question of the relationship, to put it very simply, between art and power. With this, we will necessarily be moving in the triangle between artistic practice, space of global media, and that of politics. We'll be moving, I'm sure, back and forth between the three. The task given to us is to ponder on the truth effects. What truths are embedded in the images under question, what truth claims are made, how the images affect truth, and perhaps even, why should we in the field of art examine the notion of the truth at all? Now, back at the university a couple of decades ago, I was told that art needs peace and quiet for its development. That was one of the reasons, one of the sentences that made me stop studying political science and begin studying history through history of art. Yet even in this moment of peace, that's what I found out, of the olden times, art produced images of war, celebrating its warriors and thus ensuring their place in history, as it were, through carving their image into eternity. It seemed back then that as if art needed war and war needed art. This complicity between art and war, however, takes on another shape today, as we live in an era where war seems to be omnipresent, all-encompassing, and a defining condition. Thus, art cannot but engage with its complexities continuously and in real time. I have to think of the opening statement of the Negrian Heart Multitude, War and Democracy in the Age of Empire. It's a simple sentence that opens up complex deliberations about this subject. The world is at war again, but things are different this time. The things are different this time. As some thinkers remind us, and I have specifically Boris Groys in my mind, who wrote in his text, The Fate of Art in the Age of Terror, in the critical reader titled Concerning War that was just mentioned, the following, I quote: "The contemporary warrior does not need an artist anymore to give him fame and put his action into the universal memory. For this, the contemporary warrior has all the media at his immediate disposal. Every act of terror and every act of war are immediately registered, represented, described, depicted, narrated, and interpreted by the media. This machine of media coverage is working almost automatically. It does not need any individual artistic intervention, any individual artistic decision to be put into motion. By pushing a button that makes a bomb explode, a contemporary warrior or terrorist pushes a button that starts the media machine." Thus, the imagery is often produced by the warriors themselves. Think only about the self-styled video recordings of martyrs or terrorists who set up on their missions. As these are instances of sacrificing one's life for the higher goal, something that a number of writers declared impossible after the end of history, these are strong images. Images that are beyond the reach and out of the toolbox, as some say, available to the contemporary artist. One could go further with listing the complexities art has to put up with, so to say. The notion of the media itself, of course, and these are things I'm just listing because they are all familiar. Media itself in continuous flux. And we know that today most images produced by individuals, usually by cameras inbuilt in smartphones, reach us through social networks and the internet rather than traditional media. This is a phenomenon that summed up aesthetic democracy, in which the mass production, distribution, and sharing of images does not necessarily need to be seen as amateur journalism, but rather though I admit with a little bit of a stretch, as a mass artistic production. The means of production and distribution of images and texts make participation in art accessible to all. The tools of making images, editing them, presenting, distributing, sharing, building and preserving archives, etc., have become a mass practice, if not a mass obsession. So the books that brought me to study history through history of images, I tried to remember what it was, and there was a particular statement, and I need to bring it up, even though that really feels like a statement from a distant past, is Susan Sontag's statement from the 1970s of the image world, right? While real people, so she says, are out there killing themselves or are the real people, the photographer stays behind his or her camera, creating a tiny element of another world, the image world, that will outlast us all. Today, we can perhaps say this image world is indistinguishable from the world at large. It is the world at large. We just need to situate our conversation with art practitioners about art in the intersection of these relatively new complexities and begin untangling the questions given to us for this panel. Who shows what and why, how the manipulation and control of images come into effect, and the importance of understanding the underlying aims and mechanisms behind an image in order to develop a critical stance. The remarkable colleagues who are here with us and who join us at this table will each make a brief presentation talking about their artistic practice, but first please allow me to introduce them. Trevor Paglen will speak first, is an American artist who lives and works in New York. His artistic work blurs lines between disciplines like science, contemporary art, and journalism to construct unfamiliar ways to see and interpret the world around us. Paglen holds different degrees from various universities, and he remains an affiliated researcher in geography at UC Berkeley. Paglen's work has been exhibited, among others, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the Tate Modern London, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Taipei, and the Istanbul Biennial. His art and writing have appeared in major publications, including the New York Times, Wired, and Art Forum, and awarded with numerous prizes, e.g. from the Smithsonian or the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. In 2008, the review designated the Utne reader named Paglen one of 50 visionaries, and in 2011, Art Review designated him a future great. In 2011-2012, Paglen is an artist in residence at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum and at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. On my right, Roy Samar, the Lebanese video artist and photographer who lives and works in Beirut, in Lebanon. He completed a master's degree in film studies under the supervision of Jalal Tawfiq at USEK, Lebanon. While producing his personal videos, he worked in the news and broadcasting TV industry until 2008 as a video journalist for ABC. Since 2003, he has exhibited his work in numerous film and contemporary art festivals, among others, the 14th International Festival for Electronic Art, Video Brazil, Sao Paulo, Middle Eastern Experimental Film Festival, La Cinémathèque, Paris, 2004, and International Film Festival, Rotterdam, 2012. Former artist resident at Apex Art, New York, 2010, he's currently giving seminars on alternative video practices in different universities in Beirut. He's participating in the exhibition Image Counter Image, with a work in which he processed his impressions on the revolution in Egypt as part of the Leica competition in the footsteps of the great explorers in a personal narrative. Last but not least, Tom Hollard is a culture studies scholar and critic. His research focuses on art as knowledge production, media theory, visuality and subjectivity, image politics and migration. Hollard was the editor of Texte zur Kunst, co-publisher of Specs, and co-founder of the Institute for Studies in Visual Culture, which documents the development of visual culture in the present. In addition to publications like Ensichert, Krieg als Massenkultur des, and There Goes My German, of the 21st century, from 2002 with Mark Terkasidis, or Regieren im Bildraum from 2008. Holler has published many articles and essays in magazines, compilations, and catalogs on artists such as Harun Farooqi and Omar Fast, who are represented in the exhibition Image, Counter-Image. Before further ado, I would like to offer the floor to you, Trevor.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for inviting me today. This is a great honor to be here, and thank you all for coming. The image that we're looking at right here was taken in a very weird part of the United States, deep in West Virginia. There's a place called the National Radio Quiet Zone, sometimes also called the National Electromagnetic Quiet Zone. And it's a very, very weird place because it's a place where you're not allowed to have radio signals. So this means if you go there, your cell phone won't work. You are, for the very few people that live in the forest around here, you can't have wireless internet, you can't have wireless anything. You can't have a wireless channel changer, you can't have wireless speakers, and so on and so forth. And in fact, they patrol this area with cops, drive around with frequency counters, and if your electric blanket or toaster is broken and is giving off radio waves, they'll get a knock on your door and they tell you that you have to turn it off. So why this very unusual area? Why this strange place? The public reason for the existence of this radio quiet zone is that there is a radio observatory in the middle of it called the Green Bank Radio Observatory, and this is where people do a radio astronomy, and the astronomers that work there want to collect very faint signals from the universe around us, look at X-rays and gamma rays and so on from the center of the galaxy or perhaps even the edges of the universe itself. And so they want to have a very, very low noise floor so they can collect these very faint signals from outer space. And incidentally, this Green Bank Observatory is also where the search for extraterrestrial intelligence began. This is where the astronomers first started to listen for signs, radio waves from other civilizations around the universe. But this Green Bank Radio Observatory is not the real reason for the existence of this radio quiet zone, but listening is. There's another radio observatory of sorts, which is shown in this image here, which is operated by the NSA, the National Security Agency, and they too are very interested in collecting very faint signals from the sky. This installation here was built in the late 1950s because the National Security Agency discovered something called moon bounce. What they discovered was that if you were on a two-way radio, for example, in Moscow, and you were talking to people, let's say you're an officer and you're talking to your troops or something like that, you'd be on a radio, and your radio would broadcast signals out into the sky, and some of those signals would be picked up by a repeater and transmitted to the person that you were talking to. But your handheld radio was actually pretty powerful, and it would broadcast signals omnidirectionally, and most of those signals would just go up into the sky. And from the sky, they would go on into outer space. Well, when those signals went into outer space, some of them would hit the moon. And when they hit the moon, they would bounce back. And what the NSA discovered was that if they looked at the moon with very, very sensitive receivers, they could eavesdrop on people talking all over the world. Now, I'm not sure that that's what they do anymore. That sounds like it's a little bit obsolete to me. And so the dishes, however, at this installation, they don't look at the moon anymore. And instead what they do is they look at the sky over the United States itself. In particular, what they're looking at are communication satellites. But these aren't communication satellites that are being used by people in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or what have you. They're being used by people in the United States itself. In other words, these dishes have been turned in the opposite direction to look inward. And this is the sort of thing that's been going on quite a lot these days. For many, many years, my visual work has been a kind of exploration of 21st century political epistemologies. How do we know what we know? What are the status of truth claims, what is excluded from the visual language and visual landscape of politics. What do these exclusions look like? And when I say, what do these exclusions look like, I mean that very literally. I don't mean that as a metaphorical question. For some bodies of work, I've adopted techniques from astrophotography, photographic techniques that you would use to take pictures of distant galaxies or distant planets. And I've turned those techniques to the ground itself, using them to photograph secret or classified military and intelligence installations around the world from very, very far distances, up to 60 miles. In these photographs, we see these, sort of non-existent places through miles and miles of heat and haze. But we also see something else. In addition to being photographs of clandestine state facilities, these are photographs of what it looks like when you push the physical properties of your own vision as far as it will go. We're looking through so much heat, distance, and haze that light itself becomes undone. The colors of the spectrum become disentangled from one another, diffracted, defocused. We see what it looks like when vision itself reaches its limit. I've also studied the structure of CIA front companies that are used to conduct covert operations, like the CIA's Extraordinary Rendition Program. This is their program to kidnap people from around the world and disappear them into a network of secret prisons or other countries. This building, for example, is a suburban Boston building, and it hosts a company called Premier Executive Transport Services, which is an aviation company behind much of the CIA's rendition program. And the sign on the door says Hill and Plakius attorneys, who are a couple of divorce lawyers. When you look, you crack open some of these companies, you find people like Colleen Bornt, another person named Brian Dice, became obsessed with collecting the signatures of people like Tyler Edward Tate, who, as you can probably tell, is not a real person. Tyler Edward Tate has a kind of negative existence, and his negative existence is somehow crucial to the reproduction of other negative existences, or the most brutal and violent forms of American exceptionalism. And in these sorts of corporate documents, forged signatures and passports, postal records, tax filings, and other bureaucratic refuse, I found a landscape of disappearance akin to the secret air bases and weapons ranges of the American West. A kind of bureaucratic sublime. Another project is an examination of the uniform badges and patches worn by men and women who are charged with working on black or non-existent projects. It's a very, very strange thing in the American military, where they have all kinds of secret projects, and yet the people who work on the secret projects make uniform badges advertising the secret projects that they work on. I'm not making this up. I mean, this is a real thing. So I've been collecting these things. I mean, they're not something that you can go at the store and buy. They're pretty hard to get your hands on. But and this is what one of them looks like. Censor Hunter, No Country Too Sovereign. A dragon, this is a patch for some kind of spy satellite, I believe. And the wings of the dragon often signify the antenna of the spy satellite. The Latin here, I'm sure, makes no sense to those of you who speak Latin, but I think what it sort of means, it's from an internet meme that says, "All your base are belong to us." This is an outfit called the Alien Technology Exploitation Division within the U.S. Space Command in Colorado. The bottom of the patch is, of course, Klingon, and it says, "Don't ask." Another project involves working with amateur astronomers to develop a database of secret objects in Earth orbit. And working with amateur astronomers around the world to catalog things that aren't there. In other words, non-existent satellites or secret satellites. Crunching that data, building orbital models of these spacecraft, and going out into the sky and photographing them. This, for example, this streak in the image is a secret satellite moving through the frame over the course of about a 15-second exposure. And this satellite here is like an evil twin of the Hubble Space Telescope. It's a space telescope that's pointed down instead of up. Now, a lot of my work is inspired and uses methodologies and techniques appropriated from geography, like more specifically human geography. And for geographers, the world is not just a text or a system of signs. Textuality and visuality are but two parts of an elaborate ontology of spatial and temporal becoming. Geography is a way of thinking about the world around us that frees us from a kind of textualist or representationalist approach towards cultural production. It encourages us to think about materiality and to think about materiality as a kind of active historical agent. Now, this link between materiality and politics seems especially urgent to me at this moment. In an investigation of what my friend the geographer Derek Gregory calls the everywhere war that characterizes the present moment, we can ask some simple questions about the ways in which materiality and history are linked to one another. First question, why is Guantanamo Bay still standing? Second, how is it that the CIA's rendition program continues? How is it that the assassination teams Dick Cheney talked about but didn't quite implement came to be under the Obama administration, and how did they come to include American citizens among their targets? How did the drone war expand since the Obama administration came to power? How have these machines enabled new geographies of warfare and terror, and how have they become paradigmatic of the everywhere war? How did the illegal domestic surveillance programs become enshrined in the law and an unquestioned, quote-unquote, legitimate function of the American state? And how has the Obama administration continued to over and over evoke this so-called state secrets privilege to keep all of this out of political discourse? And how have they come to prosecute more whistleblowers and leakers, people who have talked about these programs, than all administrations combined in American history? And so this link between materiality and politics in history, as cliche as it sounds, has led me to thinking a lot about space and time. I've been, on one hand, trying to understand what 21st century annihilations of space and time look like. I've been looking at the figure of the drone a lot, spending a lot of time at the various drone bases around the world. And as one of the pieces here in the show, is working with hackers and people who do amateur radio people to try to see some of the things that the drone sees. Drones are controlled by a network of satellites whose links are not always completely encrypted. So thinking about this relationship between space and time has led me not only to want to understand the 21st century versions of what Marx famously called the annihilation of space with time, but it has led me to think about the obverse of that, namely the annihilation of time with space. How do the things that we make today, or the things that we made yesterday for that matter, determine what tomorrow is going to look like? How do the things that we make sculpt history in their own image? A few years ago, I walked into a liquor store in a small snowy town called Cortez, Colorado. And as I walked in, I had a camera with a super telephoto lens kind of wrapped around my neck, and the man behind the counter said, "Wow, with that camera, I bet you could see into the future." And little did this man know that that's exactly what I was trying to do on that particular trip. And so I leave you with this last image. On the left is an image that might be familiar to you. These are the ancient cliff dwellings of the Southwest, famously photographed by Timothy O'Sullivan in the 19th century. O'Sullivan, of course, was on a reconnaissance survey for the American Department of War. The people who inhabited these structures sort of famously destroyed their environment and their civilization around 1100 AD. And these ruins have become stranded in time, perhaps like an unmoving puddle that has become detached from the river of history. And yet, through their own brute materiality, they persist. And on your right, we have a very similar image. This is a photograph of something called the Clark Belt. This is a ring of dead and dying communications and eavesdropping satellites that form a thin ring around the Earth at an altitude of 36,000 kilometers. At this altitude, these machines are freed from the effects of atmospheric drag, and their orbits are stable for eternity. These are machines that will slowly circle the Earth until the Earth itself is no more. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trevor. Can I ask one brief question of clarification before we move further? When you talk about yourself being an experimental geographer, is that a parallel identity to that of being artist, or is it one identity? The question I'm asking, do these findings find their home outside the so-called domain of art? I know the problems of the questions I'm posing, but so the question would be, what impact would these images have onto your work as a geographer, if that's indeed a parallel activity?
For me, it went backwards. I mean, my original training and my original kind of set of investments from a very young age is as an artist, and so I was trained as an artist, worked as an artist, and I got to the point with my work as an artist where I hated the fact that being an artist was always like doing a degraded form of research, where it was always like the artist as anthropologist or the artist as this or that. And I thought, well, I want to be as good an anthropologist, someone who's really an anthropologist or whatever it is. So I went and did a PhD at Berkeley in geography. And it was on the other part of it, with the research I was doing for my projects was getting to the point where it, was a huge amount of field work, a huge amount of original research, and I just thought, I'm generating so much research to do these projects that I should just write books almost as in order to have an ethical relationship to the world. I'm like learning all this stuff, and other people might want to know about it, so I should sort of do that. And I think, so the geography very much followed the art, but on the other hand, the two fields very much influence each other. But in terms of what I do every day, I'm pretty firmly located within art. I mean, I go to geography conferences once in a while, but in terms of like what I do every day, it's not, I don't go teach, geography. I go and work in the studio or what have you.
Let's hold on there, and I look forward to discussing this further because it's really, really fascinating. But at this moment, I want to offer the floor to Roy.
Okay, so thank you for being here. I will start with, I read a book 12 years ago by William Burroughs. It's called The Ticket That Exploded. And it's a narrative science fiction book. And at the end of the book, there's a kind of appendix called The Invisible Generation. I have quoted a few sentences into one paragraph that I will read. And the book was written in 1962, so that is like 50 years ago. what we see is determined to a large extent by what we hear. It's all done with tape recorders. Consider this machine, what it can do. It record and play back, activating a past time set by precise associations. Any number can play. Yes, any number can play. Anyone with a tape recorder controlling the soundtrack can influence and create events. This is the invisible generation. He looks like an advertising executive, a college student, an American tourist. Doesn't matter what your cover story is, as long as it covers you and leaves you free to act. So, in this text, he's basing himself on experiments that Ian Somerville did in London, and he shared it with him. And he was trying to talk about a way to use technology in a more like magical way to activate events and to change reality as we experience it. So when I went to Cairo for the recent revolution that happened in January 25, 2011, I immediately remembered this text, and I immediately thought about the possibility that this is actually what is happening, and the revolutionaries in this in Cairo are actually the invisible generation, and their tape recorder has been upgraded by a mobile phone that has much more capacities. So about recording the event and spreading it and circulating it was mainly the magical operation that the invisible generation were doing to collapse the regime. Late 2010, I got commissioned by Leica, who's a camera manufacturer, to follow in the footsteps of James Bruce. And he is a Scottish explorer who's said to discover the source of the Nile between 1768 and 1773. You can find his book on Google Books, it's available. So it was a kind of the first form of, this was the first form of journalism, and he kind of described whatever he saw. He hired an artist with him to paint, to draw whatever he saw, plants, animals, people, maps, and then he described, so it took him 5 years to do the whole trip, and it's all written and well documented in the book. Okay. So I got interested in that project because it had the nature of a time travel, and I thought that basically Taika had asked me to follow in the footsteps of someone back from the 18th century. So the reason was to promote their camera, to promote their products, but I thought it's a good opportunity to me to, and that was in December, so before I had any idea about the revolution. So I was set to document the Nile River from Alexandria to Aswan. This would be my second trip there, and my first one was in 2007. So we made plan December 10 to leave around February, and then January 25, the revolution started in Egypt, and the only incoming images of what was happening in the street, as you all know, were made by the protesters, the invisible generation, with cellular phones and uploaded everywhere. I immediately took my film camera, loaded it with a black and white film, and started taking pictures, snapshots of the videos as if I was in the events in Cairo. So I was documenting the events through what I was receiving via Twitter and YouTube as videos. And apparently they were much more efficient than the state-owned television, who were still doing pro-regime propaganda in high-definition images until recently. So I understood that there was no point to go to Egypt anymore if I wanted to make the same images that are being uploaded on the net. But still, I decided to go since everything was set. So I bought a ticket to the 28th of January. on that same day, 25, my friend who was accompanying me made a kind of premonitory dream and paranoid dream where he's like, he saw that we are secret agents, and it was unclear for which regime or state, just intelligence agents in an absurd way. We had something important to transmit to someone, actually, yes, something important to give to someone, but we are forced to pass through a number of cities as a cover. We know that we are being watched constantly. We move from hotel to hotel, and we change our dialect. We keep changing our clothes, and this was his dream, and it goes on and on. Okay, so January 28, when we arrived, the internet and the cellular were down. The government decided to put everything down so people cannot communicate, thinking that maybe this will break the communication between people, and then maybe they can win over the protesters and crash the uprising. But it did not work, because January 28, my hotel was right next to Tahrir Square. There had been a huge battle in the dark. All you can see was fire, and on TV channels you can see nothing, basically, because there were no images coming. So there were just tweets and little banners saying that gunshot being heard, police cars being heard, gunshot. That was absurd. It was just text feeding, no images, in the dark, total battle in the dark. But we could see being there, and we could hear what was happening, and everybody else in the world, it was like everybody was so expecting this huge event to be documented in images. There was zero images, so zero, blackout. And 29, we woke up, and the square was all burned down. The police cars were burned down, and they fled the streets and threw their helmets and everything they had. They left it on the street and fled. And the army took over in a very weird way. They were positioned, and the protesters were cleaning the square. So there was this blackout between 28 and 29 where no images were they were produced, but no images were uploaded for everybody else. So when I got there, it also struck me how empty Cairo got. Like everything was centered in that square, and then the rest of Cairo was totally empty. It's like, and this is an event for me, because first time I was there, Cairo, like if you ever been there, Cairo is a 24/7 kind of city that doesn't stop to move. I mean, cars, people, shops, everything moves at midnight the same as noon. So you went out from Tahrir Square, if you left it a little bit, you look, and it's like a set after, let's say, you have a set in Hollywood, and the filming was done, and then there are a bit leftovers in the streets, and that's it. And you can actually hear the wind and the birds, and this was impossible. So I thought this is very important, and this is also an event that needs to be documented, because it might never be repeated again. So I said to my camera to document these empty spaces. Oh, sorry. And I started from my hotel. And then we went all the way down. Those places are usually super filled. And here we see nothing. So back to Tahrir Square and the army. But we were happy because we found a place that sells beer, because everything was closed, so it was a big celebration for us. I mean, because we were smelling this, the nerve gas for 3 days, and we started hallucinating, and we needed something to cool us down, and you couldn't find anything except nerve gas and burning tires. Tear gas. Yeah, nerve gas is very dangerous. I'm sorry. Okay, so I just documented this with my camera and my mobile phone. And here I decided to actually continue the project that I was set to do, and it was basically to document the Nile River and whatever happened on the borders, which is a super kind of touristic project. So I went to Giza, I went to Zamalek, and of course, everywhere I go, it's just emptiness, 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 emptiness. So I was just filming empty streets, taking pictures of empty streets. So this is Japanese tourists I found with this. And this is the rest of the event. But what actually was very interesting on what was uploaded, so this is just a briefing of the narrative. So I immediately started to wonder about the physical aspect of image making compared to what James Bruce was doing. He hired an actual artist, a real artist who would make drawings to document. And I was using a medium that's basically condensing reality into a cluster of electrons and metadata that are stored in a very small little piece of plastic that's called the SD card. And this is like everything we have as a support for our image. And I started to worry and get paranoid about the possibility of losing this SD card, or something would happen. Then I would lose the valuable images of empty Cairo, that like there's nothing in them, but what would happen to them? And especially when we got arrested at the end of our trip by pro-regime people, and just because we had Lebanese passports. So the first thing I did was to hide my SD card in my underwear so they wouldn't get to that. And so they interrogated us for 4 hours and why we were there, and they couldn't believe that we actually arrived on January 28 by accident on the same day. And they were always trying to drag us into answering that we are actually people sent by a certain government to do something evil in Cairo, which also inspired the title of the video when the main, like we went to the Ministry of Interior and the security forces, and he started to say to us that we are trying to catch those spies that are working out there for the destruction of Egypt. So the events for him was set up by people who activated the population there. And then, this is what he told me, and then he started repeating, there must be an invisible, malevolent hand stirring all of this. So it resonated with the invisible generation of William Burroughs. And I said, so probably we are in utopia. It was fully realized and established. And this is the ecstasy of communication. And this is the electronic revolution that also Burroughs talks about. The mobile phone device does not have a camera actually in it. It's more like a scanner. It scans reality, audio and video, and it doesn't make pictures. And it's literally about gathering information and spreading information like a virus. And then I remembered also the Flusser. It came back to me later, a sentence when he says that every revolution starts with a technical one. So every real social revolution starts with a technical one. Can I have the video now? This video struck me, like it was the most, I think it's the most important video that was uploaded by the protesters. It was actually the act of striking the image of the tyrant who was, an image that you can, I don't, like people who were ever in Arab countries, especially in Egypt, on every little corner, every little street, you have a portrait in different sizes of Mubarak, in that case, who's looking and staring at people. So basically the effect of doing this is to remind the citizen that who is in charge, one, and to give them this feeling that they are being actually watched by this person in charge. And the most courageous act was to actually decide to go up there and strike this portrait and tear it off, and literally to deface the dictator. And it didn't stop here, so that was uploaded on January 26th, the second day when it got really, really serious. The uprising was really serious because before that, There were small attempts, but they were crushed immediately after 2 days, and everybody would disappear. Like people who organized the uprising would totally disappear and then found killed in the Nile River. But this time it got very serious and it didn't stop. And we started to see something that we never saw ever in the Arab world, is basically people would have the courage to go up, strike the dictator, deface him, make him totally irrelevant. Okay, and film that act of defacing and spreading it. And this is exactly what gave it more power, because if they only did it without filming it, it would have been a local thing, and the effect would have been local. So this is how courage became contagious, and how they spread the courage throughout, showing everybody that this face that has been watching us for 40 years and terrorizing us just by the mere presence, and this is how he was sustaining the power. Now we can take off this image, and we have the courage to do it, and then we're going to spread the image everywhere. And this is when I think Mubarak have lost his power and his position as someone ruling the government. Though he did not resign, it needed 12 days, more days for him to resign, but on the 26th, So on the 26th, he lost his power, and that's it. And this goes back to that basically this is an actual, can we turn this down a little bit? So this was actually a magical operation, and it goes back, it's rooted back to a primitive kind of thinking, where when you destroy the image of someone, it's like you are affecting this someone directly through a kind of magical, let's say, control. So it's a control, it's like a remote control. You strike the portrait, you destroy the image of someone, and this someone is affected directly. And this is what happened in Cairo. And you had this primitive force that came and kind of surfaced up in the people and the population. And this is why they had this courage to actually bring him down by starting by defacing him. And this is not the only image. Like there's maybe 200 examples like that all over Egypt. The first thing that people would do after trying to protect themselves from security forces was to deface the dictator, film it while defacing him, and then spreading the image. And this is how they actually won, by doing this act, destroying the image that have been watching them for 40 years. This is how I would like to end it, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Roy. Thanks for your presentation. Now let's try to improvise this further. I'm gonna ask Tom whether his presentation is reinstalled onto the other machine.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much for coming. I prepared a little input which I tentatively titled Negotiating Opacity. Invisible, the title of Trevor Paglen's 2010 Aperture monograph that deals with his work on covert operations and classified landscapes, as well as Transparent Evil, the title of Roy Samaha's 2011 video on the Egyptian Revolution he's been just talking about, supply this truth effects panel with quite appropriate terms. The moment truth is recognized to be an effect of an image or an effect caused by an image, belief in the representational, testimonial, evidential trustworthiness of the image tends to be replaced by disbelief, mistrust, and a heightened attentiveness towards notions of invisibility and transparency. For any discourse that acknowledges that truth is produced by images rather than being embodied by them, is thoroughly marked by the dialectics of invisibility and transparency, or opacity and transparency. Though invisibility and opacity are not the same thing, I'm aware of that. That which cannot be seen and that which cannot not be seen are closely intertwined. Something is always hidden behind, or to be more precise, in the surfaces of the visible, demanding investigation of the media facade and its reverse. While the transparent, the seemingly unfettered visibility of evil, for example, cries out for demonstration, to be laid bare and exposed for the purpose of becoming fully apprehensible. But who is expected to be entitled and capable of exploring the shallow depths of the invisible and the transparent, respectively? According to a common view, it is the contemporary artist who is called upon to scrutinize and question the iconic and iconizing production of non-art mass media of journalism, both professional and non-professional. She or he is supposed to vicariously cope with the impact of visual torrents in times of digital imaging and the internet. This stands towards art and its somewhat heroic role as a critical force is based on a host of rather problematic assumptions regarding art's extraordinary powers, capabilities, and responsibilities in responding to ideology and spectacle. These assumptions about the labor of disclosure and resistance are being reiterated and modulated by a wide range of voices in contemporary theory. For example, a few years ago, Antonio Negri and Eric Aliès, pondering the role of art in the era of what they call the global hybridization of war and peace, proposed that contemporary art should be conceived as a deterritorializing and deregulating force that fights and escapes the immanence of empire. When war and peace in a world without, inside or outside, can no longer be discerned as different, as opposing each other, contemporary art is destined to become the agent of exodus out of this zone of indistinction, fighting a war against war. Negri and Aliès expected art to rigorously turn its back on the regulations of the visible and the sayable, deconstructing and deregulating the a priori forms of war and peace. The artist thus confronts, quote, this opaque zone of the indiscernible and destroys the system of sensory proofs that belongs to a false social peace, end of quote. In a similar vein, Jacques Rancière notoriously maintains that contemporary art should undo and re-articulate the, I quote, connections between signs and images, images and times, or signs and space that frame the existing sense of reality, end of quote, in order to displace its own borders and expand its activity. A politics of aesthetics might thus invent new forms of aesthetic distance or indifference, as well as ways of avoiding immersion and embeddedness in the hegemonic audiovisual regime. Interestingly, similar to Negri and Aliès, Rancière deploys the metaphor of opacity. Yet where Negri and Aliès want art to invest and attack the opacity of the contemporary fusion of war and peace, Rancière reminds us of the double nature of the aesthetic image in recent art, which transforms the finished, intelligent products of the visual industry into, I quote, opaque, stupid images interrupting the media flow, end of quote, while it on the other hand selects, revives and recycles the indifferent images of media circulation. And indeed, a good deal of contemporary art is engaged in arresting the image flow, relaying its particles in ways that allow for a different economy and ecology of perception, a different temporality of watching and interacting with the material, a critical revisioning and retooling of the hybridized image worlds, resisting their iconicizing drive. Trevor Pagelin's and Roy Samaha's contributions to the exhibition can claim to belong to this continuum of revisionary practices of detecting and contesting the opacity and invisibility of the presumably transparent and visible, of developing counter-narratives and counter-visualities that would result in the opening up of a space of thinking and acting that is at least partially and temporarily de-linked from the governmentalities of the visual. Using very different means and methodologies, Pagelin and Samaha inquisitively reorder or reassemble, but also intensify the visual information or disinformation which is disseminated via the internet, television, and print, or on the contrary, taken out of mass circulation through military redaction or censorship. However, rather than presenting pure counterintelligence and meta-information, the aesthetic form their work takes on is replete with all kinds of gaps and voids of untranslatability, confusion, or irony, at times even displaying a certain exhaustion, disaffection, or lassitude with regard to the somewhat heroic, conflictual, or antagonistic role that art is supposed to play in terms of a politics of the aesthetic. In closing, I would like to mention another complicated case of counter-imagery in the regime of an intricate collusion of war and peace. For double shooting, a new work currently on display at the outdoor exhibition The World is Not a Fair at the Tempelhof Airfield in Berlin, Beirut artist and performer Rabir Mouret installed a tunnel of images based on a video clip culled from YouTube or Syria Pioneer. The video clip shows what in all likelihood is the death of a man or a woman during the violent conflict in Syria. The person operating a handheld camera, probably a handheld camera that is probably integrated in a mobile phone, scans the urban surroundings during a shooting in a city in Syria until he or she catches the sight of a man in a green uniform holding a rifle, turning his body around and pointing the gun at the person filming him, about to kill this citizen journalist. Mouet's installation reenacts this horrifying video clip in a construction of 45 meters length. The tunnel consists of poster boards of 72 frames that make a stop-motion sequence calculated as 4 frames per second. In order to have the effect of a video in real time, the viewer should try to time her or his run from the entrance of the installation to the exit in 18 seconds. On the rear side of the posters, Mouet put short instructional text that reflect on the act of photographic documentation in Syria as a now and here, and how these photos are being perceived as now but there outside of Syria. Double shooting derives from the research and reflection that went into Mouet's controversial long-term research and work, The Pixelated Revolution. Currently, parts of it are on show on Documenta 13 in Kassel. In this lecture performance, he proposes to think about the image production coming from the uprisings in Syria in terms of an aesthetic based on rules about oppositional image making, which he collected from a variety of Syrian sources, most of them distributed via Facebook, and combined them with the 10 rules for an unvarnished cinema from the Dogma 95 manifesto by Danish filmmakers Lars von Trier and Thomas Winterberg. The resulting text reads like this text, which is part of it is used in this installation in Berlin. The resulting text reads like a manual cum manifesto giving practical advice to protesters in Syria of how to produce images that might convince the global media audience of their authenticity and truth, while at the same time protecting the opponents of the regime by not showing them with their faces towards the camera, yet disclosing the identity of members of the regime by filming and photographing them head-on. Turning the death of a person amidst the urban war zone of an ongoing conflict into the sensorial experience of a funhouse installation that is supplemented by a set of formal practical rules amounting to a very peculiar aesthetics of resistance, immediately embroils one in a seething range of ethical questions. How is double shooting's recontextualization and recomposition of a ghastly video clip uploaded to YouTube, presumably by someone who survived the sniper's attack, who is most likely seeking to provide more or the most compelling evidence of the deadly realities of the Syrian situation, to be evaluated? Is it a convincing way to raise interest in and empathy with the Syrian uprisings by inviting the exhibition visitor into an adrenaline rushing near-death experience, subsequently providing her or him with an estranging lesson on the manufacturing of moving image illusionism and evidential truth effects? It is most certainly a highly unsettling and visceral way of engaging with contemporary visuality, and one, for that matter, which directly seizes upon issues of position and positionality in relation to the particular conflict it invokes, as well as to a wide range of possible states of guilty pleasure and public war pornographic posture. Double shooting pulls the YouTube video from its embedded place on the Google-owned networked video platform and the practices of reception engendered and formatted by it, and thus dislocates it into a different sensorial and experiential register. The fact that the work is presented in Berlin in an exhibition that purposefully imitates and explores the history of world fairs emphasizes the performative, the theatrical, the scenographic dimensions of critical image practices. Through disassembling and reassembling the anonymous footage, double shooting might also contribute to the passage from the vertiginous spin of the global to the intimate heat of local violence, as Arjun Appadurai has it. In fact, the video, thoroughly de-digitized, becomes a physical place which cannot be downloaded but has to be attended by bringing one's body. This change of register bears the potential of engendering a different reception, one of performative immersion and or of public debate and argument. However, another effect of Rabia Mouret's lesson in the production of truth effects may be a standstill. The running and reading could result in a peculiar state of numbness and opacity, the criticality of which would require a new vocabulary, one that is no longer content with the language of counter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you. Dear friends, we have 15 minutes left, and I want to offer those minutes to you. Precious time to pose questions immediately if there is a burning question in the room. Let me know if there is. There is one.
I wanted to just ask Roy just about, over the last couple of years, like when I go to photography conferences and things like that, everybody's like really upset about, oh, there's this crisis in photography and what the hell is it supposed to do and what are we supposed to do given the fact that there's like 500 billion images on Facebook. I'm sure you had some thoughts about photography in particular at this moment of the revolution in Egypt, and I'm just like wanted maybe you to talk a little bit about that moment and what it meant for you to be a photographer in that moment, and whether you learned something about what you think the future of photography or a future of photography might be from that.
I don't have this. I mean, I use my mobile phone to take pictures, so I'm not really concerned if photography dies tomorrow.
But that's also
It's
photography,
like
right?
If people don't
like,
make,
that's still photography.
Yeah, but I mean the crisis that professional photographers that the devaluation of the profession of like using huge equipments and making pictures and working on the aesthetics of the image. That is one side, and it's amazing, and we can still do it. But there's also the other practical side, which is basically, and for me, if I would think of a photographer, it would be Gary Winogrand, who said that basically photography is about describing a place and not illustrating an idea in a picture, but rather kind of describing and illustrating the idea behind that space. And I think we can do that whether we're using a huge medium format that will cost us a fortune, or we're using, of course, it will change in terms of representation and the way we render space on the lens that we use. But I don't think photography is in crisis. It's just, it has now a different use because we have a new machine that is the mobile device. So why not use both? Why not be a proper photographer using nice machines, nice lenses, high-end lenses and camera, which I do and I have. And I also rely a lot on anything that I can find within, like, for example, I never had a mobile phone with a camera, and I bought it in the airport, in the duty-free when I got to Cairo, because I said, wow, if they take my camera, because when I used to work as a journalist, I always encountered security people taking my camera and having to run after them and beg for the tape. So I said, this time I'll keep, though I was not working as a journalist and I was not assigned by any specific editorial, but I have this concern, and it actually happened. So we got arrested, and we got checked, and we got scanned, and we got everything, and they wanted to take they look at the camera, and actually before I left in the morning, I replaced the SD with all the images with an SD of the people that were in the hotel and some people being silly and kissing each other and stuff like that. So they said that those guys are just two idiots who just came here, and let's leave them, let them go, and they didn't even take pictures of the revolution. Yeah, but the mobile phone was filled with pictures, but they didn't care to look at that because they know that everybody was spreading the images, and they don't care anymore. They don't really care anymore if like images went out or in. So that's it. But photography is in crisis. I don't think so. I think photography is getting better and better, and it's like we're adding functions to it. So in terms of technology, so it used to be a big wooden box where you needed like 7 hours to set it up and to take a picture. And then some companies, like Leica itself, made the small portable 35 millimeter that took from cinema. And now you can go and take pictures, like in 7 hours, you can take 7 million pictures instead of you know. And then the mobile phone is like connected to a web, and then you can set it up automatically, and then you can go to sleep and wake up, and you'll have whatever happened in the street, not even have to be there. So it's an add-on. It's good. It's amazing. And yeah.
I want to quickly check the urgencies in the room, because this is your afternoon. Yes, there are many.
Do you see any relationship between this flow of images that you just mentioned and this very interesting turn towards landscape photography and the emptiness that we could all see in your images that you were just presented?
Whom would you want this question to be answered by?
All of you, really, because all of you were talking about the emptiness at some point in photography and in picturing the conflict.
You.
Tom, I think you have to know.
Well, I can only, I mean, if there's really an increase of landscape images picturing or depicting empty landscapes or the emptiness as such, I could only speculate about the reasons for it. It might be on a symbolical level. It might be really an attempt to escape the abundance or the overabundance, the fullness of contemporary image-scapes, of contemporary visual culture, of the contemporary regime of visuality, which is not really producing that many gaps and intervals. So I think it might be an attempt to carve out a space from which you can actually or where you can actually start to move and think, and the emptiness might be or type of interval. I would prefer that term maybe might be the prerequisite for another kind of action, which is not completely governed and which is not completely conditioned by the regimes to be. So it's in a way it's a kind of, it might be seen as another way of exiting contemporary visual cultures.
So Tom, just to clarify, the numbness you mentioned at the end of your presentation referred actually to this possibility. So you saw it as a possibility.
Yes, it is. Though the numbness which might be or may be produced by an installation such as the one Rabia Mouret is presenting at Berlin is of a different order. I think it's a kind of it's a numbness which goes with a kind of with a physical engagement in or physical immersion in this kind of in the space of death. That might be as well paralyzing as could have also the function of carving out the space or this interval I've been talking about. I'm not so sure which way it could go. It could also lead to kind of a numbness which nothing to follow from it.
But you have ethical concerns with that particular installation.
I wouldn't call them ethical concerns. I know that in the range of projects Rabia Mouret is doing around contemporary image production in Syria, but in the Middle East, in areas of conflict. He's always trying to keep the moral or ethical position out of his own work. So he's trying to work as not unethically, but without concerns, too many concerns around the moral ways of judging his research, and he has been fiercely attacked, especially in the Middle East, Lebanon, presenting the Pixelated Revolution project, as he was since he was accused that it's actually not only unethical but politically maybe wrong to work with this kind of material during an ongoing conflict. Mm-hmm. And I'm not so sure I'm not entirely sure what the exact arguments were for this accusation or for this criticism. But it's but I kind of but I could imagine that this is that there is a certain fear that disclosing the very strategies and practices of citizen journalists in the war zone is something which could play into the hands of those who are in power. It's one explanation.
I was thinking since early today, Okwi mentioned George Didis Hupperman's notion of the pictures despite everything. I wonder whether that would be applicable to this kind of mode of artistic practice where you actually bring in images of citizen journalists into this kind of context. And specifically if I recall the argument around pictures despite everything in terms of truth. They contain moments of truth, if I quote it properly. Which means that they do make claim in participating partially in truth, but cannot be expected to reveal the totality of truth or the big picture of the truth. And I was thinking ever since Okwi mentioned it this morning, like, is this a way we could look or help ourselves understand these sort of practices when we talk about the notion of truth. Do you see the parallel there? Or is this stretching it too far?
I think it's might be stretching it too far because I mean,
Could you do the mic? Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm not the only one who's capable of responding to this, but I think it's really a question of whether one should suppress or invisibilize this image material or not, and whether it could help any cause whatsoever, whether it could have any empowering effect on those protesting and fighting against the Assad regime in this very moment. And I wouldn't claim myself to be in a position to really to really understand what is happening there. So I wouldn't go so far. No?
Roy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, what's amazing is our relationship to archive, like the image that Rabia used and we are all like using, is that basically now we are ahead of the archive. We use it while it's being done.
When the archive is being produced.
Yeah, while the archive is being produced, it enters a certain circuit of reflection. And I mean, this is my feeling when it comes to watching what's happening and how the circulation happens and how people take something, use it somewhere else, and then cut it into something else. And then you have video clips, let's say sentimental songs about the martyrs of the revolution, and the archive is there. So we're not concerned about looking for the archive because the archive will get to us in the comfort of our own home. So, and we can use it while it is being produced. And this is the novelty in our relationship to the archive. So if Rabia used this image, this image was made a month before he made the installation. So that's something I always think about it. I'm concerned about archiving and using and this collapsing of the time frame, like yesterday and tomorrow and now, and this change of the notion of the evolution of time. You know, and it's like the circularity and like everything is laid out on the same surface, which is the surface of the planet, and it's literally and physically that everything is on the same surface and we can access it in all directions. So there's no more, there is still the notion of tomorrow and yesterday, but we also have the notion of give me that and take that, and we circulate time in space. I don't know if it makes any sense what I just said. No?
But the text that's part of the installation is I've been privileged to be in continuous conversation with Rabia Mroueh because we recently published a book with him and about his artistic practice. And I found it quite fascinating. He collected texts on internet that are both practical and conceptual set of advices to citizen journalists, how to film in order to convey the message, and how to film in order to stay alive and not to bring anybody in danger. And indeed, if you go through these texts, they do read like manifesto of new contemporary filmmaking of this particular moment. It's quite fascinating how this kind of activist circulation of advices, basically, is on the go redefining our way of producing images, sharing the images, distributing the images. There were two questions, so let's stretch time a little. There was one in the back and one here. Shall we start there? You already have a mic. Please go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I have a question which is maybe philosophical, maybe personal, maybe political. I've been struck several times today and yesterday with a sentence. I've heard it here as well. It is more important what is not been seen. I think, Roy, you mentioned that, or part of another work in the exhibition is like a desperate, I couldn't see everything. So we have on one side this wish of all of us to see more and to explore what is unknown, and in your works, Trevor, as well. I mean, organizations, places, events and so on. On the other side, we do have also digital technology, and we are able to make now these images with phones in the events and so on. So, and we have access to this information. So we are getting more information, but we still are aware that we cannot see everything. There is much more. So does this make us happier or just frustrated? I mean,
in relation to what?
That it's equally it's equally important what you see than what you do not see, or what is in the picture and what isn't in the picture. I think that was the link.
Yeah, but I don't know if it has any relation to happiness. Like making pictures, not making pictures, looking at events, not looking at events. It's a kind of circuit that we are in, because it always entails for the person who's recording and sending or uploading or any kind of production that I am sure that there will be someone who will see that. You know, this sentence is constantly repeated by anyone who produces an image, whether a small child playing with his little camera, or a revolutionary, or an artist. There's always this idea that I am sure that somewhere at the end of the globe, through whatever it is, the mean or the medium, somebody will see it, and this is a kind of communication. So if it makes us happy or no, I don't know. I mean, it's like, what do we need at the end? Like, what do we need? What do we need to see? And what's the use, like, to when we shower ourselves with images? Is it a kind of erotic desire, like to get aroused by the image itself, regardless of the content? So it doesn't have to be erotic by itself, but the watching images, receiving images, has more like a haptic kind of experience. From what I see it, like this kind of addiction of sending and giggling, you know, like you make an image and you send it and you start here giggling in the same room because something happened. So
I'm going to try to meet the challenge of 3 minutes. So we have one question behind Okwi and then Okwi still. So we're going to start running quickly. 18 seconds, was it? 45?
18.
My question is a very short one. I just wanted to know whether you've got any experience as to the counter images that maybe exist of your work already.
Are there counter images there of your work?
Who?
Yours and Trevor's?
Counter images of
your work.
Yeah, why not?
It's unbeatable
it's
answer.
always usable. Anything is usable. I mean, Derrida used to deconstruct text, but you can deconstruct Derrida, and I mean, anything is I mean, yeah, you can take a piece of art and dismantle it and do something else. But do you really need to do that? If you really do it. I mean, yeah.
I would say maybe at this point I would like to thank you for the contributions. And did you want to ask a question, Okwi? Okay,
I wanted to check Okwi, who is in charge of this panel.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to suggest that we have a quick coffee break. Thank you all for your contributions and your input. Sorry for the technical problems which we had and delayed a bit.
Thank you very much.